started. But before we get started, as always, I have to go into my little 30-second elevator speech. Whoever's on two, I'm muting you, getting feedback. But let me just go into my 30-second commercial. We do have classes starting on Monday. I am so excited. We have 2 new trainers that have joined the team. So I will no longer be doing the group trainings in the year. And I will, about end of the summer, I will be a CEO. Thank you. Shani is Shani is one of our trainers, and we have Sherry Tolliver, who will be another. Both of them have gone through an intense training and train-the-trainer program to make sure that they were able to deliver the same information that I'm delivering. I'm confident that they are there. So I'm excited. But as I go into our commercial today, today's Lunch and Learn webinar is featuring Ms. Dawn Tucker, Lord and Tucker Management Consulting Group. She will be discussing understanding what is the federal acquisition strategy. Tomorrow we'll have our standard orientation session from 8:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. The classes will begin Monday, actually, March 18th from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Please register at www.gpiwin.com. Again, the program is now a program where it is 3 modules. You no longer are able to take the classes in separate sessions. Once you sign up for the Business Ready, you're signing up for all 3. We also now offer direct one-on-one, which includes 18 one-hour sessions, but you also get to participate in the group training at no additional cost. If you need more information on that, you can email at info@gpiwin.com, and the phone number is 678-822-2303. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into our Lunch and Learn webinar. I'm excited again about Dawn, you joining us and just providing us with your insight on how this really works. And so it was interesting that you chose the topic, understanding what is the federal acquisition strategy. Is there any reason that, and I guess I'm lost with that too, because I don't really understand it. So I'm glad that you brought a topic that I wasn't even familiar with. So.
Okay. I've thought about the topic of acquisition strategy or acquisition planning because that's the beginning of the process. And the federal government has distinct steps that it follows. And if a person can understand what cycle or where the acquisition process is, then that will give them a leg up on how they go about marketing to the federal government. Mm-hmm. An acquisition, if the contracting officer working with the overall team, the program officer, the project manager, the contracting officer representative, these people, the small business office, these are the people who are part of a team that will come together that will put out forward an acquisition. Now, acquisition can be a small acquisition. And if it's a small acquisition, say under, I say, a purchase card order, now the threshold is $10,000. The next threshold is now, I think, up to $250,000. Yes. So these thresholds will determine how much acquisition planning needs to be done and how long it's going to take. But if, for example, we are now in March, so the federal government cycle goes from October the 1st through September the 30th.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on how large that acquisition is, if it's over maybe $5 million or even higher, it's going to take longer for that acquisition planning cycle to occur. So the earlier a person gets involved or does marketing to the government, then it can make change or affect how the strategy is going to be laid out.
So is that coming from the budget? Is that how are you determining how is that acquisition strategy determined in the dollar amounts? Is there some type of pool, or how are you breaking those dollars out to even determine how the money is going to be split?
The money is there. For example, if a agency or division or a bureau in the federal government has X amount of their budget, as you're saying, Paula, then they're going to come up with a plan even before they come to the acquisition office to say how they're going to structure the acquisitions that they have to go after. So that.
Oh, hold on one second, Don. I muted someone and I accidentally muted you. Okay. Hold on one second. Technology. Okay. There you go. I'm sorry.
No problem. The budget, once an office in the agency gets their budget, they will determine that part of their budget they know will have to go towards acquisitions, purchasing things or products or services. Mm-hmm. So they'll do a plan internally that they have to present even to get the budget. So the budget is already in a sense laid out with how many types of different contracts that they want to go after. And then it may be, okay, I can use my purchase card up to $3,500 because I need to purchase some pins, or my group needs to have memberships in a certain organization. So the best strategy for that would be probably maybe to use the purchase card up to $10,000. Mm-hmm. But as you start to move up, say an IT purchase, there are certain steps that need to go through to be able to request funding for an IT project. Mm-hmm. So the IT project will have an estimate, an internal estimate attached to it, and that will start to say, okay, it's over $10 million. We estimate that this is going to cost us over $10 million, mm-hmm. but it may be more or less. Mm-hmm. So then that'll help to start the planning process for the when they come to the acquisitions office with their procurement forecast. Then the procurement forecast is going to come from the program offices to probably maybe the small business office. Then the small business offices is going to work with the contracting office to say, there's all this discussion and interface back and forth in the beginning of that fiscal year. Mm-hmm. To help to determine how the acquisitions are going to be starting to be rolled out for that year. And then they'll know, oh, this one will take me more than a year. Mm-hmm. It's going to cost me more money. So an acquisition plan has to be attached to a request that comes into the acquisitions office as part of what they call a procurement package. Okay. That makes sense. And it's a play on when you talk about bundling a contract, or they don't want to have a big acquisition that no one person can do, or they are going to have 50,000 different subcontractors. Sometimes it has to be that way. For example, if it's a DoD system, but if it's something else that does not have to be quote unquote bundled, then they're going to try to make sure that the work is phased out or is set up in such a way that it's legal and ethical. And it is. That's why it's called acquisition strategy, acquisition planning. Mm. The agency has an overall plan, that each of the divisions will have plans. And once those packages start coming into the acquisitions office, then there has to be a determination if the plan makes sense.
So you have a team, and I remember speaking with someone at DOD, the small business specialist. She was telling me generally around June, of each year, they'll come together to determine what the next fiscal year is. And I guess sometimes it's confusing when you see, and I'm having even the students looking at the budget, or the budget forecast, and I'm not sure how do you even drill down from that to determine, or are you even in that ball? Are you all in that level of involvement once the budget is approved? And how do you drill down to the acquisitions that agency is going to go after?
That's a good question, because June sounds good. DOD is very good at acquisition planning and pre-forecasting. They'll do maybe 1 to 2 years of a forecast, pre-acquisition planning. However, other agencies, there are agencies that I know, they put out, for example, National Institutes of Health. It's my understanding that they put their acquisition forecast out on a quarterly basis. They may be working on it behind the scenes, but it is presented to the community in the world on a quarterly basis. In my opinion, that acquisition plan should be at least a year ahead. And when, as you said, when the budget drills down and you're looking at the budget, at least you're looking at the major categories that agency is going to be focusing upon. If you know it's going to be cybersecurity, certain types of IT systems that they're putting into place, it gives you an idea of where the agency is heading. And if it's, most of the agencies do a lot of IT. A lot of them do that, but then there's specific types of IT that they're looking for, and cybersecurity is a subsection of IT that is huge at this point, and there's a lot of needs. The government is re-engineering itself, the reprocessing. They're looking for different ways to do certain types of providing services into the community. And if, for example, if they feel that they can do it in a different way, then they may be written up. They may have a blurb about that in the budget.
Okay, yes.
So yes. It is, some of that is mining. That's called data mining.
Okay.
When you have organizations like Deltec or Govt, and people come to you and say, you can purchase this information on acquisition forecasting, because we're going in and they're going in and they're asking questions and making calls on certain types of acquisitions that they see that may be ending because the information is in the systems, like, you know, of Paula, FPDS, USA Spend. So if the data is manipulated, you can see a lot of information ahead of time that you can start forecasting and matching it up to what you see in the budget to see if that is going to continue, if this particular type of a contract is going to be continuing, or if they're going to be adding on different or new types of contracts.
Gotcha. So after you all, y'all come together, and then y'all come up with the scope of work, how do you all interact with the contracting, the core, the program? You said program manager. Is that someone that's different than the contracting officer representative that you're interacting with, or are those one and the same?
It could be different. The project manager may be someone, or a program manager may be someone who has a specific activity that they're in charge of, and they have a group of people on their team that put together that support a contract that's under them. Or they may have several contracts that are under them, that project manager or program manager. And on that team, then they will have contracting officer representatives supporting that acquisition. Okay. So the program manager or the project manager, they're managing. And then they have support staff. You have IT, you have the cores, you have cybersecurity, any types of things that may be needed. That's where all those clearances come in. There are a lot of clearances that come into play that must be adhered to, and that's included in what we call an acquisition plan. An acquisition plan has to be written I think it's about $5 million. There's certain reasons where there's a documented written acquisition plan. There's something called a streamlined acquisition plan. That's a different dollar value. And then there's also acquisition just planning that you don't have to document the same way. If, for example, if it's for a purchase card buy, you just have to document your file, but it's not where you have to have a written acquisition plan. Mm-hmm. But the acquisition plan is the responsibility of the program office. Mm-hmm. And they put that plan in place and they attach it to what we call that procurement package.
Okay.
Procurement packages go to the acquisitions office, and each acquisition office generally has what they say needs to be part of that procurement package. You have to have your purchase funding. All your funding needs to be attached. That statement of work, as you asked about, Paula, that's part of the package. So all these documents and the timeline and the due dates are all scheduled out. And there's a meeting ahead of time with the contracts people, and they'll say, okay, we're going to give you a milestone schedule. If you want to have a $5 million contract awarded, then, and this is going to be maybe fixed price or time and materials, then this is how long they have a procurement timeline. It generally may take you 30 to 60 to 90 days, or if it's full and open competition, that takes the longest. Full and all of that, that's all a part of that planning and strategizing. So if you have a good contracting office team and you have a good team of communications, then that acquisition is going to be a lot more effective. And hopefully, as we were talking about, if there's a protest, or there won't be a protest because that acquisition planning has been taking care of different questions or issues ahead of time.
Is that acquisition plan public for each department, or is that an internal process?
It's an internal document.
Okay.
The acquisition plan is generally an internal document. Now, you may hear pieces of the plan, but that plan is part of the internal process.
Shawnee asked from Libra Management Group, is a request for information a part of the acquisition planning?
Yes, that's a good question. It is. The request for information is part of the acquisition planning, because then that'll help to determine, for example, the first line that they're looking for small businesses to do the work. And that's laid out in the federal acquisition regulations. Small businesses are the first one who have the cut at doing work. So that request for information, when they send it out or sources sought, that's why they are asking, when you hear go to different meetings on marketing to the government, they say, please respond to the sources sought or the request for information, because we want to know if there's certain small businesses available that can do the work. And some of these requests for information ask questions because that's part of how they're looking to make the strategy. It may change the statement of work. There are other types of engagements with their industry days, that type of pre-planning. All that pre-planning and talking back and forth with industry is early on in the acquisition planning process. And it's okay to talk and have that interface, because that is how the strategy is going to be determined. And then once they close it, say, oh, can't talk anymore. Plan is set. The strategy is set. We're getting ready to issue this solicitation. So questions have to come in a certain way. Once it hits the street in a solicitation format, you have to only go through the contracting officer staff or the contract specialist. So that pre-acquisition planning, strategizing phase, where you have industry days, requests for information, you can come in and do demonstrations, all that is all a part of how acquisition is structured and ready before it hits the street.
How often, once businesses, especially those in the 8A program, I guess, have an extra benefit in responding to sources sought notices? I know as a specialist, I told and would direct a lot of my firms to respond to it and then submit a request to me as your specialist. requesting to you, the government agents, to set it aside as a direct award for that company. Did you receive a lot of that as a contract specialist, having those 8H firms actually trying to stop the procurement in the next step, and how effective was that? Or is it?
Generally, if a strategy is set up and something is in the 8A program, a requirement is in the 8A program, then it's going to stay pretty much
Correct.
in the program unless something changes it.
Correct.
To put something into the program, there's, again, certain steps that you're going through when you're doing your research. Because if there isn't, the 8A firm can say, please set this aside for me.
Okay.
However, if my research is showing that there are several firms that can do this work, then it may not be the best strategy for me to put it into the 8A program.
Okay, based on your number of responses that you've received from your market research.
Exactly. Now, sometimes there are certain instances where, even though there are a lot of firms out there that can do the work, it will go into the 8A program because of timing.
Correct.
Sometimes timing is an issue, but competition is also something that the government likes to put into place as well. And not to say that 8A work will not happen like that, because again, yes, that could happen. It could be set aside. It could, because of what somebody has that they feel, that particular contracting office feels that this can be and should be set into the 8A program because of everything else that they've done to make sure that makes the most sense, then that's where it's going to go, because it's the easiest way to go a lot of times. Because
it is, once it's in the 8A, you have to have an act of Congress to take it out of the program.
Well, it has to. Well, there are times that, as we well know, we talked about that on previous Lunch and Learns. How does, if work was in the 8A program and it's restructured, quote unquote, it can go through the general GSA process, and it's a way that if it's changed somewhat, then it can be supported that it has changed and it's no longer valid to be in the program. However, if somebody comes back and questions it, or does some type of questioning or protest, well, it's not necessarily a protest, because we don't always see 8A work it's not necessarily having to be posted in FedBiz Ops. Right. It doesn't have to be. So it's, if you know though that something was in the program because you can see it on FPDS, that person was an 8A firm, it said it was awarded by as 8A, and you have a question about it, then there has to be some kind of justification, someone to explain, well, why isn't it in the program anymore, or this just has to be supported. And you don't want to do something as a contract specialist that causes you more work, or where you have to justify or defend yourself. As long as it's documented and information is there, then, and it has to go through the SBA as well. Okay, so the SBA has to approve it.
Exactly. And then I also know on the SBA side, if an agency was trying to take a small business contract and put it in the 8A program, on SBA side, they had to do what they call a small business impact, because SBA was not going to take that contract away from a small business. Because SBA is about small business. They're not going to pit one program against the other. So if SBA see that that's 25% of that other small business impact, they will not set it aside for another program.
Yeah, and I didn't know that, because once we submitted it to the SBA, I didn't know what they were looking for.
Yes, they were trying to determine, is that going to affect another small business if we put it in this program?
Okay, so checks and balances are there, so that's good to know.
Shani had another question about your experience in working with Hub Zone, and is that part of the Hub Zone and/or women-owned small business set aside, and how does that factor into the acquisition strategy?
That's a good question. That came up. I had a meeting today about the different small business programs, and a question came up about women-owned small businesses, the set-aside program that has been established by the SBA. It has distinct and different requirements, different than the 8A program. And the 8A program is you can have directed sole source awards. Women-owned is not the same, nor is Hub Zone.
Or services.
Hub Zone is a need in the federal government for hubs, and there's requirements to be considered a Hub Zone, as well as certain requirements for women-owned or economic disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. So the question came up and saying, well, there aren't as many awards made under those programs, and they're not. Because generally you're going to have some kind of competition internal to Hub Zones and women-owned versus a sole source directed award. And the knowledge base on awarding a directed sole source under women-owned or Hub Zone is not clear. That is not something in the contracts world that the understanding is there. There was a case, and maybe this is a case that we can explore or do some case studies on the Service Disabled Veteran-Owned program in VA, where internal to VA, they were supposed to be setting aside the contracts, and it wasn't happening. So there was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the company is out of Maryland that put in the request to have this looked at, and the company, what they said, they won, that these contracts for in the Service Disabled Veteran program in the VA were supposed to be being set aside for veteran Service Disabled Veteran-owned companies. So if you're looking at something even like in the VA, and there was a whole bunch of questions about how it was being administered, and then you go out to the broader world, it's not as cut and dry as the 8A program.
It's two different messages. And would you say, can you recommend any strategy for those who aren't 8A or and just as a small business and Hub Zone, the women-owned, how do you use those certifications as a strategy in marketing to the agency?
What I would do is, if there are outreach sessions for women-owned or Hub Zone at an agency, which they have them, then when you go, you talk to them and ask them, I have these certifications. What are the steps and requirements that I would need to participate? How do you go about setting aside the work for Hub Zone or women-owned small business? Can you please explain how your agency is implementing this at your agency? Because they are having these outreach sessions. So that relationship and communication, which is ahead of time, because they would like to utilize more Hub Zones and more women-owned small businesses. So that this discussion will help to strategize and have that contract staff say, okay, yes, we want this to go into these particular programs, and this is how we're going to go about it. Because it has to be a strategy and a plan. There was a women, if you go on FedBizOps, there are women-owned small business opportunities. Or I guess I haven't seen, and there are Hub Zones on there too. So if they have put those particular opportunities into the program, then they've done their due diligence to say that this is what's going to happen. But most of the time, it's going to be a competition. And I just participated I submitted a proposal for a women-owned small business opportunity. A Service Disabled Veteran firm brought it to me, and they said that they received the women-owned small businesses that submitted proposals was overwhelming. So it was just about as large as they thought they were going to award it in September. They just awarded it. And I didn't win. But with that said, so I said, well, I would like to have a debrief. They said, well, we will, and give us time because we got so many responses. So please give us time to be able to schedule you to have a debrief.
And it seems to me there is a disconnect if these agencies consistently aren't meeting the hub zone goals. If you look at the scorecard that SBA keeps on these agencies and their goals, it seems to be a disconnect somewhere that we need to try to help them close the gap. And I'm not quite sure what would be effective in helping them to determine that there are hub zone firms out there. Because if they're not meeting their goals, then there's a problem.
And the question is too, how can they is there a way that they can sole source it? And that's the kicker. 8A is very specific, but how can something be sole sourced if it's not in the legislation or in the policy that it cannot be sole sourced? A direct award, is that something that they would be willing to do? And evidently right now that has not happened.
Well, how I direct a lot of the women-owned and hub zone, because it's based on the FAR clause where it relates to the rule of two. Mm-hmm. So what I direct small businesses to do is have two companies, both of you submit to that response. So at least that agency now know they have two viable vendors, and they can force a direct award or a sole source between the two vendors. Is that correct?
So I can't tell you, Paul. I have to go back and look myself. So yes. I'll be honest with you, I would have to look at that.
Yes. It's always the rule of two. They have to have at least two vendors. And right. I'm saying, both of you all submit it. And at least you're giving the agency a chance to do a direct award, a sole source to one of the two, because now they're abiding by the regulations of the rule of two. Mm-hmm. Well, it is 12:31, and this has gone pretty quickly. Anyone have any questions before we close out this week's webinar? Any questions? Good information, Don. This is very good. What do you want in class? Also, next week, we're going to be having Gerald Board with DB Consulting Group. He's actually up in Silver Spring, Maryland. The federal government has paid him almost $660 million doing government contracts. And so he's going to share with us his journey and his experience on how he was able to build his business up to that size. And then next Friday, we'll have Miss Linda, and she's going to continue to provide us with other insight. And with that being said, this will conclude our Friday's webinar session, unless anyone else has any questions. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.